Hey, today I wanted to discuss an album by a band I've talked about on here before, a band who goes by the name of Destructo Disk. They're a punk rock band from Virginia, and I wanted to discuss their very recent release, the full length album Bad Gravity. Now, the last time I talked about them, I talked about an EP of theirs, and if you can remember my general impressions of them, I'm trying to remember mine. It's been a while, but I definitely remember my general impressions of them when I reviewed that was that I really like them. I love what they're doing. I love their uniqueness, and I think that they have a lot of potential for future releases that they can expand upon what they were doing. And this album, Bad Gravity, certainly lives up to that. I think it's a really, really good album. Maybe even a great album. I might have to let it sit with me a bit longer before I can really evaluate it, whether or not I can think it's a great album, but it's at the very least very good. Very much for what they're doing, it is kind of the pinnacle of what they're going for. If you're not into their particular brand of punk rock with lots of chaotic songs with a lot of different parts to them that are very fast, and you can tell that you can't really have a lot of patience. You know, you don't have to have a lot of patience if you enjoy these guys. They're very, get to the next part of the song. If you're into their particular style and their particular humor, while also being more of a serious band, if you're into their brand of punk rock, essentially, then you'll really like this album. And I think it's absolutely worth giving a shot. But there's a lot going for this album, and very little going against it. But one of the many things it has going for it is the overall sound. This is definitely the best that the band has ever sounded. They sound heavier and punchier and just fuller than ever before. It really feels like there was an emphasis on a lower mid range of that really punches through everything. The band sounds tighter than they've ever played before, at least on these recordings and whatnot. Feels like they've really studied these songs and got them down. Might be sort of a given for a band to know the songs and perform them well, but you can tell in the performances that they're not just familiar with the songs, but excited to be playing them, which is, it's nice to have that fire in each of the performances. Speaking of the performances, each band member and each part really feels tightly performed, and the timbre of everything is very much unique, and they each have that certain special quality to them where nothing feels like, oh, that's a generic snare or kick drum sound, that's a generic bass tone. Everything kind of has that certain quality to it that makes it stick out to you. So very cool sound. The album sounds very good. And from a songwriting perspective, they're also definitely not slacking here. I mean, they're writing some of the better songs that they've written so far. I think some tracks that stick out in particular is showcasing that is the opener, Punk Rock Die, which starts the album off in a very cool way, and it sort of sets you up for what the album's going for, and it has a good 1-2 punch with the follow-up track, The Adventures of Bad Gravity. Great. It's always good to have a good like 1-2 punch on an album, right? Where the opener really gets you hyped up. It's fast and fun, and it builds up the experience of the album. And the following track is a bit more mid-tempo, though it still goes on a crazy journey, as pretty much every song does, which we'll get to. But it introduces a bit more variety to the album and lets you know it's going to be a consistent experience. The two songs after that, Breakfast in Space and Ode to the Goodest Boy, were previously released through singles and are included as bonus tracks and stuff. And if I may be so bold, even though I really like the way that this album sounds, I actually do prefer the previous versions of those songs. I don't know exactly why. They sound good here, and the songs are still good, But I think on the previous releases, they sounded a bit more, for lack of a better word, colorful. They just sounded like especially on, say, Breakfast in Space, it sounded a bit more zany and kooky, and the vocals sounded like they were a bit more colorful. That's all I'm saying. It's hard to articulate that particular point, but I'm trying my best. Uh, the industry needs to water them / reassurance simulator. Uh, It's a good song, although I think this is illustrates a point that may go against the album depending on your perspective on it. I was in a discussion with someone else who had listened to this album, and without getting too specific, they thought it was fine. They didn't like it as much as I do, but they thought it was fine. But a complaint that they had that I can somewhat agree with is that even though each individual song goes on a big journey and has a certain ebb and flow to it, the actual album as a whole is doesn't really. It's sort of every song serves the same function, like in a narrative, right? You have your narrative beats, you have an exciting beat, or you have an emotional beat. Every single song on here sort of feels like they're serving the same narrative purpose to be that particular beat. Not to say that there's not variation between the songs, there absolutely is. But in terms of their overall function, for the most part, it's not really the case, and that's kind of a good point. The only exceptions I can think of are, say, the first two tracks, as stated previously. I think it's a good 1-2 punch at the beginning, and then the closer, which I'll get to in a bit. But yeah, tracks like this one, I think, are, an example of how the album didn't really blow me away from the perspective of how, each song kind of opens up a new chapter to what the narrative, because I know that there is also more of a concept and a narrative to this album, which I'm not going to pretend like I have a good understanding of. But I will say that the lyrics on this overall are very captivating and very interesting. Although, again, I might have to sit with it a bit longer to really. And some of them are funny, as I'll get to. But overall, each song kind of, with some exceptions, has that same vibe to it with some minor variation. But a good example of another is the follow-up track, Pepperoni Lopez. I think I talked about this before, mentioned this song, and it still absolutely holds up. I think it's one of the better songs on the album, definitely, and one of the best songs that they've had. I think it's very well written. The lyrics are captivating, and the melody and the vocal harmonies sound really cool. The lead singer and bass player, Gideon and Molly, respectively, have their voices meld in a very cool way when they trade off or when they sing in harmony. And I think that that's on full display here. And the song has a really nice structure to it. It's a very satisfying listen, Some tracks later on, going a bit out of order here, but say tracks such as Cruel Borders and Black Smithers, those songs are solid, but again, I could say the same thing about them as a couple other songs where, they're solid, they have fun, exciting energy to them, but they kind of feel similar to the point of they're exciting and fun, but what is it really telling me about the overall band that I didn't know previously? And I'm not even saying that that's a huge problem. This is not a huge complaint about either of those songs. It just illustrates the overall point that doesn't make the album complete mind-blowing for me as of now. A track that does stick out is really cool is You Don't Even Surf Here. It's a fun concept and a really cool groove and a good build-up in the beginning. It's really neat. Another song, Destructo Disk, which is not only charismatic but also very funny. It's a fun concept. Moon Gloom and the penultimate track, which comes after it, Night Witches, I think both of those songs illustrate a point about the album, two sides of it, sort of. Moon Gloom to me feels like another sort of typical track on the album with an added element of, say, atmosphere that they wanted to add in. And to me, though the song is fine, that added element feels a bit tacked on. It's like, well, kind of adding that extra edge to it, but it doesn't really feel like the song itself sticks out as much as I think they might have wanted it to. I could be wrong about that, but that's just how I feel. Whereas I think the song after Night Witches does accomplish that with a certain unique atmosphere because it has a special kind of build up and a dynamic structure to it and an interesting arrangement throughout, which I think in the end leads up to the song itself having a cool function and atmosphere, whereas a song like Moon Gloom felt a bit more typical, but still cool. And then the closer, Liminal Space is great. It's a great closer. Really great vocal melody and harmonies in there. The bass player Molly does some lead vocals on that, which are really cool to hear. And again, it makes it feel a bit more. It makes that's where I think the band shines the most, is when they're showing these different facets of the band, and it makes the experience a lot more exciting and varied. Another thing that I think helps with that is the horns. I believe it's trumpets uh, used on the album from time to time. And I've heard some contention with some people I've talked to. I've heard some people say that they actually are not huge fans of it. I really appreciate it. I thought that not only were the parts that they were playing sound cool over the parts of the songs that they were, but it also allowed the songs to have a bit more of a unique spice in that particular part of it. Whereas, when you listen to a song sometimes and it's a guitar solo or a lead guitar part feels sort of tacked on. I don't think this band is guilty of that, but I think that the parts that they chose to have the horns over did a good job of easily sort of finding an easy way to make the part stick out more and work more and have a cool vibe to it without just, we got to do a lead guitar part because I guess. It's like, no, just have a horn part. I think that it added to it. Overall, this is a very, very good album. It's very consistent, but I can also see that maybe being like, well, what's the point of listening to the whole album if every album song sounds the same? And I don't think every song sounds the same. It's just, once you've heard a few songs, you kind of get the album. That doesn't disqualify, say, the rest of the songs, because they're still great, and you're absolutely probably going to prefer some songs over the others, but it also means, from a positive point of view, that, if you're into the band and you're into the album, then if you put it on shuffle, there's a very small chance that you'll find a song that you're not into because of the style. It's very consistent and solid from that perspective. But I think that this album as a whole is really good, and I might even bump it up to saying that it's a great album further on. For now, I just think that it's really, really good, which is far from an insult. I absolutely think that it's worth checking out if you're open to their brand of punk rock, and I just think it's really good and worth checking out. And after that, maybe check out the rest of the stuff that the band has done. So yeah, that's my review. Check out Bad Gravity by Destructo Disk.